Winter of 1965, transit workers under the leadership of Mike Quill were ready for a tough contract fight. The TWU had held strong for 30 years, often threatening to strike, but the union had never shut down the bus and subway system in New York until we did so at 5 a.m. the morning of January 1st, 1966. How did this come about? A new mayor like John V. Lindsay was set to take over from Mayor Robert Wagner, who had served for 12 years. At the same time, a TWU Local 100 contract was expiring. Lindsay, like many mayors and transit bosses before and since, laid down what he thought was the law to the TWU. Let's listen back 50 years to WINS radio reporter Doug Edelson's on-the-scene reporting.
January 1st, 1966, 5 o'clock in the morning. The city was starting to emerge from the New Year's celebration the night before. Then, suddenly, it happened. The subways stopped running, the buses returned to their garages, and New York was in the grip of its first citywide transit strike. The strike was to last 12 days, inconvenience millions, and all but shut down the busiest city in the world.
Before taking office, Lindsay sent a list of 10 mediators to Mayor Wagner, not to Quill. Men he thought would be qualified to broker the transit negotiations. The TWU rejected them all, saying they didn't have sufficient experience.
Quill, critical of Mayor-elect John Lindsay, demanded that he sit in on the talks.
And Mr. Wagner was borough president of Manhattan when we had exactly the same impasse. He sat down with the union for 6 weeks and got acquainted with our problems. Now, Mr. Lindsay have been making rambling statements from here to Ponce, Puerto Rico.
I don't believe that it is in earnest at the present time. This whole matter can and should be settled rapidly. There's no reason why it can't be done with by the expiration of the contract. In fact, it ought to be done in 2 weeks if there was real bargaining in earnest round the clock at the table.
At that time, $3.46 was just about the highest TWU wage, the hourly rate for a motorman and a bus driver. A power distribution maintainer made 3 cents more, yet some city employees made much more than that. The TW Express, the union's newspaper, reported that the union had been pressed to the brink by blundering and stalling that left 2 months of talks still at dead center. The union held a mass rally at the Manhattan Center on December 26. 8,300 transit workers voted unanimously to strike if the city did not make an acceptable proposal. A last-minute offer by the city of a 3.2% raise, a $25 million outlay on New Year's Eve was too little, too late. TWU Local 100 had made extensive strike preparations, and the executive board pulled the trigger. Local 100 identified 59 strike headquarters in 4 boroughs and issued 2 pages of detailed instructions on how to shut down the system. The rank-and-file members carried out their orders.
As I speak, our city is crippled by a strike against the bus and subway system. It is an unlawful strike against the public interest called even before the collective bargaining process had run its course. It is an act of defiance against 8 million people. I shall not permit the public interest to be flaunted, no matter how severe the stress.
The following day, the union reduced its contract demands by what they called 80%. The Transit Authority called the offer unacceptable. In the meantime, as millions of people made their way into the city without public transportation, the roads and streets became clogged with traffic going nowhere. People walked, they hitchhiked, some skated, and most took it in a good-natured manner for the first few days.
I think it's no good. How about Mike Quill? Oh, he's terrible. He's real bad. They ought to put him in jail, that bum. The quicker you get rid of him, the faster last, the shorter last.
No, I think it's a wonderful thing, and I think Mr. Quill is doing a good thing to help the fellows out, and I really think that the city is pushing all the blame on Mr. Quill, and it's not Mr. Quill's fault.
What can I do? I'm being a good citizen right now. I have to sit and enjoy this. What choice do I have?
Business felt the pinch from Wall Street to the newsdealer on the corner.
Can't sell no papers. I usually sell about 400 or 500 papers by this time. I only sold about 75 papers. It cost me $6 to come here. I can't make a living.
The city was in the grip of the most paralyzing strike it has ever encountered. On January 4th, as the strike wore on, the state Supreme Court entered the picture. Mike Quill was told to end the strike or go to jail. Mayor Lindsay spoke out.
It is an illegal strike, and the court has issued an injunction against it. Therefore, I have urged the Transit Authority to take appropriate legal steps to enforce the injunction.
Quill and 8 other officers of the union were found guilty of civil contempt in defiance of the injunction.
We will not withdraw 1 penny from our original demands. The strike will remain in effect. And if we go to jail, the second line of leadership will take over. So if they think that they're going to scare us by flooding the place with blue documents, they have another thing coming.
But the courts did have another thing coming, and they ordered Quill to be jailed.
I don't care if I rot in jail. I will not call off the strike. Judge can drop dead in his black robes. We will not call off the strike.
With much hoopla, a great deal of confusion, and considerable display of temper, Quill and other union leaders were arrested at the Americana Hotel and taken to the old civil prison on West 37th Street. Following the arrest of Mike Quill, the second line of command took over the union and the negotiations. At its head, Douglas McMahon.
Say that what's fair and equitable and reasonable to all parties. The only trouble with that fair and equitable and reasonable story that Mayor Lindsay has been spouting about over the television is that it ain't fair and it ain't equitable and it ain't reasonable to the 36,000 people that Mike Quill represents.
2 hours after his jailing, Quill was stricken ill and rushed to Bellevue Hospital. His condition listed as serious but not critical.
The New York Times called for the police and military to man the buses. The Journal American and conservative commentator William F. Buckley wanted the National Guard called in to run transit. The Daily News editorialized, "Don't let this irresponsible demagogue alarm you. Do cooperate with the authorities and your fellow New Yorkers in meeting Quill's impudent challenge." WCBS said, "The strikers want more dollars in their paychecks, more holidays, more leisure time. We don't believe for a minute that these desires of 36,000 transit workers merit the suffering of 8 million people." The World Telegram Sun said, "Whatever their motive in pulling the strike, the lesson must now be dawning on these characters, that the old days and ways of Wagnerian accommodation and appeasement are gone. There is backbone at City Hall these days, and throughout the city as a result of Mayor Lindsay's example. The strike leaders had better know it." On January 10th, 15,000 picketers from the TWU, along with other labor supporters, ringed City Hall. Shirley Quill delivered the jail Mike Quill's instructions to the strikers. "Keep your lines firm. Keep your picket lines strong. Keep your determination to get what you deserve." 1010 Winds reported on the rank-and-file transit workers' upbeat attitude as they walked the picket lines.
There's these guys on the sanitation department hauling garbage around, and they're getting like $4 and 4 change an hour. Right? We got to go out there with a 37-foot-long bus in the traffic. All these maniacs getting on the bus, screaming. We got to answer questions, make change. Watch the left side of the bus. Watch the rear door as the people are getting out. We got to make sure that you got to watch the rear view mirror, the traffic coming down. And you pull in and out for 8 hours, going down 5th Avenue, coming up 5th Avenue. I mean, that's hard work.
Sanitation department is making roughly about $1.25 an hour more than the bus driver.
And the garbage doesn't talk back to them.
On January 10th, as New Yorkers struggled to find their way to work, marathon negotiations recessed, since, according to McMahon, they had been completely unproductive. And he took a slap at the mayor.
This guy professed to be a liberal. He said he was pro-labor. He said it was for the working man. He said he was going to do all these kind of things. What the hell has he done as his first act? put Mike Quill in jail.
When negotiations were at their lowest ebb and tempers at the breaking point, Mayor Lindsay advised the mediation panel to take tough measures to end the transit strike. The union, through McMahon, replied.
The strike will go on till hell freezes over.
Then on January 12th, suddenly came a break. The Transit Authority made a $62 million offer to the union, and union negotiators recommended acceptance of the mediators' plan for ending the 12-day strike. Meanwhile, a subway motorman expressed his feelings.
Now, I got a 10-car train or a 6-car train with maybe 2,400 people. Flesh and blood lives in my hands. One wrong move and 400 people go to the hospital. Pay a man for his skill and his responsibility.
At 1:37 a.m. on the morning of Thursday, January 13th, after marathon negotiations, Local 100's vice presidents announced that they were recommending a settlement to the executive board. The terms were a great victory for the TWU, a $60 million package, including 15% in wage increases over the 2 years of the contract. No reprisals against strikers, the securing of 2 new holidays, Veterans Day and Lincoln's birthday, and more money for pensions in addition to other improvements. By the end of the contract, a motorman would see his $3.46 hourly wage increase to $4 an hour.
By early morning, the subways and buses were once again running. Slowly, New York returned to normal. But New Yorkers will never forget the crowded hotels, the clogged roads, and the 12 days that New York all but stood still.
Congratulatory telegrams poured into the TWU offices from labor unions all over the country. The union had scored a powerful blow for working people, upending the draconian Conlon-Wildland law and setting the stage for a better framework for labor relations in New York State, including binding interest arbitration. The TWU had shown that you could stand up to the bosses, even when the courts and the employer tilted the playing field, and you could win. The TWU win was to usher in a great era for public sector unions in New York State, with major gains for hundreds of thousands of workers and retirees. The union celebrations were marred on January 28th when Mike Quill died in his sleep of a heart attack. When Mike Quill was first hired by the New York Railways Company, he worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week, for 12 cents an hour, said his longtime right hand, Mighty Guinan, who succeeded Quill as president of the TWU International. Few workers had wages so low, hours so long, and conditions so unbearable as the transit employees to whom Mike Quill brought a militant sense of human dignity. I know because I was one of them. Hundreds of thousands of people mourn Mike Quill because had he not lived, their lot would be immeasurably worse. Let's hear about Quill from those who knew him. First, his wife, Shirley.
During the strike, a very great American, a poet and philosopher, named Carl Sandburg, was celebrating his 88th birthday. He had been very ill, and the reporters asked Mrs. Sandburg how her husband had spent the day, his 88th birthday. She said he spent a lot of time reading the newspapers about that strike in New York. My husband finds this man Quill very interesting because he is an impossibilist. And if there were ever an epitaph for Michael, that should be it. An impossibilist in his visions, in his dreams, and an impossibilist who succeeded in his visions and his dreams. I have known and worked with the men on this platform for many years. I know how they loved Michael and how they respected his leadership. I am asking you now to give them the support you gave Michael in all the battles, because there are many battles still ahead.
U.S. Labor Secretary, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, and former Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg.
As long as a subway train rolls along the rails of this city, as long as a bus tries to fight the crosstown traffic, with which I'm beginning to have some familiarity, as long as an airline takes off for distant ports in other continents, so long will the TWU constitute the best living memorial to its founder and first president. All of us who are his friends shall miss him very much. The boy from County Cork who came to the city of New York. Mike Quill, with his warm heart and his quick humor and his ever ready and sometimes all too ready tongue. Mike Quill, who along with you here today fashioned a great union, the TWU, as a lasting instrument to help not only the transport workers, but all the American people. Mike Quill, old friend, farewell. We salute you, and we shall remember.
Clarence Jones of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, bringing a message from the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
Mike Quill was one of the pioneers of the modern trade union movement, who never lost the fighting spirit of the 30s. He was among the giants who lifted our sick nation from despair and poverty by organizing the unorganized and by inaugurating a new era for America, a new era of social welfare and social responsibility. The trade union pioneers of the 30s designed the earliest anti-poverty program and called it the trade union movement. They fought to give it an honored place in our society, and today a whole nation benefits from their vision and militancy. They raised the standard of living, the purchasing power, and the prosperity of the whole country more effectively than any legislation and more directly than any presidential program. Mike Quill was also a pioneer in race relations. When it was hard and often bruising to stand up for equality, he was tough enough and bold enough to make himself clearly heard. Today, it is much easier to oppose discrimination, to be with the many who speak easily of equality. But 30 years ago, a leader who worried about his image and measured his popularity carefully kept his silence in order to keep his image popular. Negroes desperately needed men like Mike Quill, who fearlessly said what was true, even though it offended. That is why Negroes shall miss Mike Quill. Mike Quill was a fighter for decent things all his life. Irish independence, labor organization, and racial equality. He spent his life ripping the chains of bondage off his fellow man. When the totality of a man's life is consumed with enriching the lives of others, this is a man the ages will remember. This is a man who has passed on, but who has not died.
And Matthew Guinan, who took up the reins of the TWU on Mike Quill's passing.
I think that very simply it can be said that when Mike Quill started to organize transit workers in this city, for instance, I went to work in 1933 as a trolley car operator in the Kingsbridge Division at 218th Street and Broadway for 40 cents an hour. And had not Mike Quill come along, I would have been working for 10 years to reach the top rate of 64 cents an hour. Thank God Mike Quill came along. But remember that back in 1937, there were no vacations. There were no paid holidays. There was no medical care. There were none of these things. You got 40 cents when you worked. And believe me, I bucked the extra list for 4 years before I had a steady job. And I can tell you that in that period there were weeks when I came home with as little as $16 and $17 a week. I'm telling you this so that you'll begin to appreciate and understand the kind of job that Mike Quill did for the transit workers of this city. And I think that what has transpired here this afternoon is a fitting tribute to Mike Quill, because knowing Mike as well as I did, I know that Mike would not want us to sit down and cry too long because he died. No. He would want us to carry on the fight. And what better monument can we build to the memory of Mike Quill than for us as leaders and you as members to rededicate ourselves to building the Union even stronger than it is today.